Howdy y'all, this is AR Kavli. Welcome back to my channel. And I've been waiting a long time to make this video because finally, after many errors and many resubmissions and many proof copies, my big Renaissance RPG, yeah, there you go, is ready for release. I have learned a lot, especially in the way of patience, as I screwed one thing up after another, because making a big book, every of the little things that you can get away making a little book, it starts to multiply. You know, it's like being off a degree in course, and the farther you go, the more off course you get. But without further ado, let me introduce you to 1520 HRE, Holy Roman Empire, 2d6 adventures in the Holy Roman Empire. So we will just start with the fact that this comes in soft cover, soft color, regular hardback, regular color, and then premium color. I will, towards the end, give a side-by-side to some of the premium versus standard color to see if anyone, so that people can see if it's worth the extra money to them. But since it's my showcase, I will go ahead and use the hardcover, or the premium color hardcover for my walkthrough. This is the point of this is just to kind of give people an idea of what they're getting, which is always nice. This is 1520 Holy Roman Empire, 1520 HRE, 2d6 adventure in the Holy Roman Empire. This is a setting that is written to be historical. It's easy enough to add fantastical elements in, but it's written to be historical, no magic. And we'll go through some of the data or some of the information that's in there. It uses the Cepheus engine, the 2d6, the Traveler SRD as its main system. There's a little glossary at the beginning. And I'm not going to walk through the whole character creation system, but it's 2d6. You determine your skills and determine your background. Here's the outline of how to, the steps to roll your character, a description of your attributes, and the attributes bonuses that you get. In this particular version, I decided, instead of the familiar reduction in strength, dex, and endurance directly off the attributes, I combined them all into a single health to kind of level out the, if you have someone who's really high in strength, really high in dex, but then low endurance, I thought that the health, combining and kind of making an average, taking an average, would smooth that curve a little bit. And basically, you just add them all up, divide by 3, and that's your threshold, your health threshold. Whenever you get a number of hits to where it crosses that first threshold, then you become wounded. So you can be bruised for your first little bits, no effect. Then you become wounded. And then you suffer -1. And then if you cross a second threshold, which an average is going to be 7 points, 14 points, and 21 points. If you cross that second threshold, taking over 14 points of damage, then you're maimed and you suffer a -2 DM to all your tests. And if you get to where your damage equals your overall health, it is curtains. Here's a breakdown of what the education level means in accordance with the schooling of the time. As they taught the trivium and the quadrivium, what subjects were kind of considered, and here also what level, of degree, whether you have a Master of Arts or a student, bachelor, or whatever. And here are the social breakdown based on on the character social class and the effects and the background skills based on those. In this historical setting, your social class is very important to you. Here's a list of the German titles as the social class increases. Above 10 and above is basically nobility of some sort. And then as it increases all the way up to 18 for Der Kaiser, I've included some complexion, some physical traits. Here's some roles to determine height and weight. And then here's a standard, Cepheus engine aging table. Roles for the status of marriage and children, sibling rank, parental status. And here's a quick option if you don't like the possibility of death. Here's a quick way to basically just randomly determine how many terms, how many points you have without worrying about failing the typical survival roll. Anyone familiar with Cepheus Engine Traveler will find here's your what I call the low life table, but what would normally be called your draft table. These are the things that you roll to be if you fail to get into a regular career. In this, your rank, your social rank, one, it gives you a couple of automatic options, so you don't even have to roll. Two, you get that social bonus is applied to multiple things, as 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 they said in the first History of the World Part Two. um, it's good to be the king. Now there are, I think, 14 different overall professions, and then each one is broken down into 3 careers within that profession. Each one shares a development table, and then each individual career, spy, envoy, agitator, under the agent, each has their own skill table, and then you have your cash items, for mustering out, and a rank bonus table. If you fail your, in this, I think I call it the survival. There it is. If you fail your survival, you don't necessarily die, but here's a career catastrophe table, which is used in some other, Cepheus Engine Traveler type games. And depending on how dangerous the career is, the higher the chance you're going to get a fatal result from this. So in this one, since you're working in spies and envoys working in skullduggery, on a 5 or a 6, you'll be killed and have to start over. Also, each term, there's a career events table, and these are made for each career. Clergy, when appropriate, there are multiple priest or multiple rank titles, as well as getting your rank bonuses. And then each one of these career catastrophe tables and career event tables are suited specifically for the career. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but here's some of the cool artwork. One of the advantages of using Renaissance is that there's a lot of public domain cool Renaissance artwork, and for most of them I've put where it was from, who the artist was, and what year. All right, so there's all of our careers. At the end of the section, there's a career wound table. You can, instead of having specific, or instead of having general reduction in traits for events that could happen to you, bad things that happen to you, you can sometimes be directed to roll on the career wound table. And these are specific with long-lasting events. You know, ear severed, hand severed, lose an eye, stuff like that. And then you may also be directed, instead of rolling the career event table, may direct you to roll on the life event table, where you could have kids. You know, it's like the game of life. It's like the game of life. The system again is a Cepheus engine 2d6 plus your stat modifier, your attribute modifier, plus your skill level, plus or minus any other appropriate DMs, and an average roll is 8 or higher. Now, some people prefer to have a target number where you can increase or decrease the target number, and some prefer to have a 8 as the standard, and then a DM based on the difficulty of it. So I put both on there just for everybody. Talk about the degrees of success. Here's a list of the skills. It's not as long as some, and only a couple of them cascade, like art and I think trade. Art and trade, they cascade. The art specialty and the trade specialty have a list of period trades taken from Das Standebuch by Jobst Ammon and Hans Sachs, which is a 16th century book of trades, which is pretty cool. It talks a lot about stuff. That's where some of the pictures came from as well. Character improvement, it uses a basic get advancement points every so often based on when the GM feels it's appropriate progress points. There's a lot of Albrecht Dürer art in here because he's cool. This section is actually almost started off as the base of the whole project, was making these factions. Here's a list of contacts on a D66 table and a bunch of factions. I think there's like 30 specific factions and then a couple of general factions, and each one has a universal faction profile. And it's like any of the other Cepheus engine Traveler profiles. It describes it in a line of numbers: size, wealth, area of influence, and military popularity, and its overall political influence. And the GM can use those to run background conflicts between larger factions or small factions, especially if the characters happen to be part of that faction. Now these factions there's general factions and then there's specific factions, like the company, and it gives you enough information to use it as a filler for any other like trade house or company that you might want to use, whether you make it up or from history. The Ravensburg Trading Company was a historical trading company, and there's a little bit of information about it. It's UFP, allies and enemies. This whole section with the factions right here, the Renaissance Deluxe D100 system is really the source for this. It had it and then kind of how this project started was for that, and having the list of the general factions. It's kind of what it uses. I added a bunch of the period factions for 1520. Catholic Church, it talks, each one of the entries gives you some information about what they believe, who their allies and enemies are, and there's the Lutherans. Because in 1520, the Reformation hasn't really kicked off just yet, but it's right there at the cusp. It's right there at the cusp. And if there are specific important people in the faction that are relevant people in the faction, they'll be listed. Military factions. Lots of stuff on the Landsknecht. Hanseatic League. And a list of patrician houses that were influential at the time in the 1520s. Some going up, some in ascension, some in descension. Equipment and currency. It uses a standard dozen and a gross. It's easy enough to change it to something more convenient like 10, 10, and 10. But being as I was going for historical, I decided to go for that system. A list of equipment, food prices. And then we get into our equipment, or into our armor and weapons. A lot of games have a big long list of weapons and armor, and each one is, they have these just tiny, almost negligible details or differences, especially when you're talking about something like a 2d6 system where you don't have that granularity as you do with a D100 system. So I decided to put things into general classes, the types of armor, the type of weapons, and in the descriptions in the equipment, I talk about the type of historical helmets that would fit into that class. Okay, so like a closed helm or full helm, these cover the face, including Sallet with visor and bever, Bourgonets with falling buff visor, armets, and Maximilian style full helms. So all of those would fall in there as a closed helm and have the helm attributes for that equipment. Same with the weapons. I just have everything broken down: knife, dagger, short sword, sword, great sword, and in each one I list typical period weapons that would fall under that class. A discussion on the different types of locks on firearms of the time. 1520s, firearms are out and about all over, but there's not a great variety because they are still pretty young. But the early 1500s, you see a lot of growth in production abilities, material sciences. You start getting the cool little wheel locks, which make it very easy for the riders to carry pistols on their horses as they're riding around. Some discussion, again, some general rules, general classes of artillery. And this is my note to remind me which one is which, just so I can make sure I'm pointing at the right one. Combat is going to be familiar again to Cepheus Engine. I decided a lot of systems have gone streamlined, and I like that. I like streamlined, but I decided to add more detail than less. So each person gets one action, and there are quick actions and full actions. And the quick actions happen first. The full actions are more effective, but they happen after. So that adds a matter, it adds a flavor of tactics as to how you want to act, what you're going to choose to do. And everybody declares what they're going to do before everyone announces it. So the players each have to say who they're attacking. The GM has to determine what the NPCs are doing first. And everything is simultaneous in the turn. Everyone acts. Simultaneous, all the quick actions happen at the same time, and then all the full actions. There's some grappling moves, a list of modifiers for melee and ranged. Most of them fairly simple, fairly common to people who are familiar. And also, I like the idea of extra stunts for doing well, for rolling well. And so there are, if you get an effect of 3 or higher, you can choose to, just as normal, add the effect to the damage, or you can pick some stunts to do that have special effects. Like double strike, you get to hit twice if you hit the target. Um, you can do a feint if you're the defender, if your defense roll, because all the combat rolls are opposed rolls, and whoever wins, whether you're both attacking or if one person is attacking and one is defending, whoever wins with the greatest effect wins. If you're defending and you get, saying you win with an effect of 4, you can do a riposte stunt, and then you strike them. Not only have you defended them, you then get to strike them in return. And here's a weapon fumble table. I'm also, even though I went more complex with this than less complex, I'm a fan of minimalist gaming. I like minimalist gaming systems, and so I included this little block here for the free Kriegsspiel, the freeform war game method. And so instead of worrying about all these things, if that's not how you like to play, if you like things to be very streamlined, this little block tells you there's a quick determination of how far away the targets are. There's no list of moves of quick or slow or anything. You just declare what you're going to do, and the GM will decide. Everything will be pretty much simultaneous, but the GM has a bigger hand in determining what happens when. And instead of trying to use a big list of dice modifiers, the GM just says, you know what, this guy's better than you, so that's going to be difficult. And you can choose or not, you can choose to use the effect still, but just a way to smooth things out, quicken things for you. Damage and injury. This talks about giving first aid and the effects of maiming. Now, another thing I added was this critical injury table. Whenever you roll a damage dice against somebody, you hit them and you roll damage, and as long as you do 1 point of damage, as long as you get through their armor, if you rolled any 6s, then you've gotten a critical hit. If that damage roll causes them to cross either into the wounded or maimed threshold, then you roll a d66 to come up with the critical hit. So if you knock someone into wounded, and say you roll a for location, torso, and gut. They're wounded. They still take their hits as normal, but they also, when knocked out, they're stunned for d6 rounds, and that's not great for them. One of the things of a historical game is it really counts on natural healing. During the Renaissance, they had some very advanced surgical abilities, more so than you would think. Actually, even they're pretty smart guys about a lot of things. Um, but like infections and recovery, well, sometimes it's just basically whether or not you're strong enough to make it through. And here's a very simple vehicle and naval combat system. It talks about a discussion of the different types of ships in the area, a simple mass combat system, which is basically the commander ends up rolling, or you let the PC roll, and the effect determines how that battle turned out. And here's a cool picture from Hans Holbein the Younger, circa 1524, of a push of pike, where the pikemen and halberdiers are getting ready to kill each other. All right, the beastry and bad guys, of course. Again, this was written as a non-fantastical campaign, so there's no monsters. But here's a handy, quick NPC procedure, and you can use it for PCs too. But for NPCs, that looks like a typo. Probably shouldn't have pointed that out. But you generate what kind of role they have. You generate their health just on a quick d6 plus something, depending on what they are. And then you determine their attitude and their probable reaction. And it boils down to, when you run through the procedure, you get a one-line stat for an NPC like this. Koons Michaels, he's a robber. Craft, skill level 4. That includes, it's just a random determination. It includes his skill level and any attributes. Just a simple roll to determine that. There's his health thresholds, his damage, his armor, and his attitude. There's Father Hines. He's a scholar, level 3, and craftsman, level 2. Damage D3, AR 0. He's not really a fighter. But the roles are combat, scholar, craft, and social. So it just depends on what their main function in the campaign is, their main skills. And then here's a list of stock NPCs. Their skill level, or not their skill level, but the type of skill that they have. A generic health if you just want to use it, and damage and armor based on the type of character they are. And here are some typical animals that they might encounter: wildlife, war horses, whatever. I tell you what, researching those war dogs they had then, those things were nasty and mean. I mean, they had, they had armor, they had big spikes on them, almost to the point where they looked crazy, like it was a cartoon almost. But, ooh, man, those things, you get a mastiff with a spiked collar to keep the other mastiffs from biting its neck, and you set them on somebody. Man, those are some mean dudes. Bad doggy. All right, chapter 8, campaign. This is all your, weather, travel. There's Kaiser Karl V, otherwise known as Charles V. And that's Michael fighting Satan. Weather, here's random encounter tables based on the area you're at. And these are, of course, they're historical, no monsters or anything. And rules for suffocation, falling, your typical things. Poisons. This list here is another inspiration and really a conversion from the Renaissance deluxe game. But these are all period poisons. Mercury, they use that a lot. Poison people a lot on accident with that one. And here's a discussion of antidotes. And a lot of the antidotes did not work. But here's a discussion of the things that they tried that they thought might work. Illnesses and disease from the time. And this is a history and timeline. There's a lot of information here, basically on skimmed over, cut down. I did actually cut a lot out of these sections because I had a lot of stuff here, just because I found it so interesting, and some of my feedback was that I should maybe trim some of that back, so I did. Basic information. Here's a timeline, and I brought the timeline forward before the campaign, just to give people, if it's 1520 and you're a 22-year-old guy, you can use some of this information to see the kind of stuff that was going on back then. When you were growing up, or maybe in your formative years. And these are just little blurbs. And the 1520s, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of names that people know are in here. Chapter 10, we start going into the government and the laws. A lot of this is going to be maybe too much for just info dumping, on players. This is really more for maybe making a campaign or an adventure that has to do with a certain aspect of the law of the Holy Roman Empire, because it's a quilt work. And let me flip back here real quick. In the beginning, in the intro, I kind of do a little discussion about why the historical campaigns are cool and ways to keep it real, and some advice on not getting too much into the weeds in the history of things, because you want it to be interesting, but you don't want it to be burdensome. Because a lot of players, they're really not going to care about the electoral council. Right. One or two might. They're there to game. This is stuff that's background information for the GM to spice up a little bit. This is something that, say a character makes a lawyer, you can add a little salt from these. There's a lot of information here, and if you're a history nerd like I am, it's very easy to info dump that, and you don't want to do that. This is background stuff. This is most of it is not stuff that the character would know, maybe depending on their social class and their background, and it's certainly not something the players want to spend a lot of time, learning. The executioner, a very interesting role. One thing about a lot of the Renaissance art is this depicts the beheading of Saint Catherine, and she was one of the voices that the Lady of Orleans thought, or was said that spoke to her, if I remember that right. But this happened long before. But a lot of the biblical artwork, a lot of the historical artwork were depicted with the characters having modern, for that time, period clothes and equipment. So, you'll see the Roman soldiers who were sacrificing Christ or whatever, dressed in 15th century armor and weapons. But it gives a wide variety of how things looked at that time. It's a great witness. Discussion of the ranks of nobility, and I like trying to use the German because it adds a little more flavor, adds a little more verisimilitude, but it can be hard to keep up with that for us Anglophones. All right, so I also included the English equivalent. So if you don't want to go around calling everyone a Herzog, you can call them a Duke. maybe use them interchangeably. One, get people used to. Religion in the church. It's very interesting, the history of Christianity, whether regardless of what you feel about it, is incredibly important to Western society. And the how some of this stuff came about is very interesting. And in a campaign set in the 1500s, especially on the at the outbreak of the Reformation, information about the church can be relevant. And again, from a historical standpoint, I find it interesting, at least. Here's a breakdown of the church hierarchy with some historical woodcuts of what they look like. There's a discussion of the holidays, traditional holidays back in the day, and some people, of course, still today follow these, probably mostly Catholics. A list of the saints of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, I had a big, huge pages and pages and pages of saints, because there's a lot of saints, like one for every day, even then. And these are historical saints from the time, because there have been saints added since then. But I also cut a bunch of those out. I'll probably just at some point add it as a free PDF or something for people who want to do who want a larger list of saints, and it has like their Saints Day and things like that, so that you can add it into your adventures for background. But for a core book, I gladly accepted the admonition to cut some of that out. Cut it out. Chapter 12 is a discussion of the Landsknecht, who were, like most mercenaries, not your best friend if you weren't their boss, but another interesting group. A discussion of the formation, the organization, the officers that make up a regiment, using both their fancy old German names and English names. And this information is good. It can be used for any of the armies at the time. Generally, it's going to be similar. This is specifically for the Landsknecht, but discussion of the law and discipline in the Landsknecht. The Pike Court, very interesting way to do things. And a discussion of the Tross, or the camp, the baggage train, if you will. A very big, very important part of any army. And that covers pretty much all of the main part of the book. Next is the adventures in Lüneburg. Now, Lüneburg is a city in Saxony, and it's a very interesting place. I don't exactly know why I focused on it and chose it to be the one out of so many cities with interesting histories in Germany to pick. It just kind of stuck to me. Lüneburg is in my heart. But here's a quick discussion of its founding and its history. It's caught up in the middle of a feud with the barons in the area, because the Lüneburg itself is an independent city. It's a Hanseatic city, and it's a free imperial city. So it does its own thing, but it's still answerable to the emperor, whoever it is, and it's surrounded by, it's never in a position where it can just completely thumb its nose at the powerful dukes and princes around it. So it's a very interesting place, and it's very wealthy from its salt. And there's a discussion of the church and the guilds and the map. I'll show you the map, but each one of these locations on the map is detailed with information. A lot of them have adventure hooks, just small hooks, but enough to put something out there. Oh, here's a historical note. I've thrown a couple of those in. From 1701 to 1702, Johann Sebastian Bach was a chorister at St. Michaelis and attended the St. Michaelis School. So it's it's well after the time of the campaign, but just interesting. And then at the end of the the discussion of the city and the locations in the city, there's a dramatis personae, the counselors, the important people, the officers of the town, the executioner, the jailer, and a feisty young lass who hates Germany and likes to cause a lot of trouble. A fancy character sheet. Here's the map of Bloomberg. This map is a historical map that there's a lot of different ones. Some of them had color, but this one I think translated the best as far as the details. But there's a lot. There are a lot of books out there. People in Renaissance, they love their maps. They love to write stuff. And here's I did modify this so you can see the locations, and then they're broken down here as well. Bloomberg's a very interesting place. And if you get it, I didn't draw it, but south is towards the top. Okay. And there's some references. Now, this is a list of cities of the Holy Roman Empire. These are large cities. It gives a location on the map and the population. And the population for 95% of them is taken from a academic book, La population de vie européenne, 1988. Now, I probably said all that wrong, but they had a good breakdown census information that tells, you roll if this is how you determine your birthplace. You roll the city, it tells you where it's at on the map, how big it is, what circle, which is basically just like a larger administrative district in the empire, the primary nationality of that city, and the languages there. And this table determines whether or not you're actually born in the city or just in the nearby environs. Village town names. Here's a table if you want to just make up a random village or town. I just kind of split up prefixes and suffixes. You roll them twice and put it together. So you got Heibeck or Nordbuttel or Schwielrod or Schwielbeek, so you can come up, and these are all taken from different, actual villages and just kind of split apart. Here's a title and honorifics, how you address the ecclesiastical, your ecclesiastical and aristocratic masters. And this was really kind of an indulgence on me. I don't really know why, but these are tables of historic random names for Slavic, High German, Middle German, surnames, forenames, talking about the naming conventions for the different cultures. You probably don't need those, but you get them anyway for the same low prices, not having them. Here's a Julian calendar. Again, maybe a little bit too much detail, but there it is. And these are maps that I created using other historical maps. Of course, I'm not a cartographer by trade, but it breaks down who owns the lands. It breaks down what the land is, what kind it is, if it's a bishopric or a county. Some of this stuff was really just stylistic choices because I wanted it to sound kind of German, but not so much that it would be impossible for someone like me picking it up to follow along, because I don't speak German. I have studied some German and done some grappling with translations in my HEMA practice years ago, trying to figure out what a particular effect book was saying. But that I was standing on the shoulders of people who actually knew what they were doing. Uh, but so sometimes the stylistic choices I made are just, some of them are arbitrary, some of them because I thought it sounded better. Like here, I use the German designation for the land, a an archduchy, the Erzherzogtum, and the more modern, more familiar, name, the Kinger, the Königreich Bohemia. Right, I actually could have put Kingdom of Bohemia, but it was just a decision I made. These are the circles, and these were basically administrative circles so that the imperial government could tell these regions how to collect taxes and raise men and whatnot. And then here's a just some game tables and a somewhat skimpy index and the OGL. Yep, I put that out under the OGL right before all that kerfluffle. So I'm glad that mostly worked out. Okay, so that is 1520 HRE, 2-6 Adventure in the Holy Roman Empire by A.R. Kavli, myself. Put out by Long Shadows Press, which is me, just using a logo. And to help people decide, I made a premium and standard color available just because I thought it'd be cool, just to see what it looked like. See if I can get both of these guys here on my screen in a meaningful way. So I'll go over here to page 65. Look at this fine artwork, The Arrival of the Pilgrims in Colne by Vittore Carpaccio, 1490. Now this one on the right, this is the premium color, this is the standard color. The main difference that I can see is this from my previous attempts. Like I said, it took me a long time to get this project formatted right. I kept making mistakes, but I actually had to lighten up some of the color on these larger pictures just to make them more visible, because the standard color tended to make things very dark. And I think that's the main difference here. You can see, especially like down here, along the shadow areas, it's very dark and you kind of lose some of the detail there. I don't know, especially since you're not buying it for the artwork, I don't know if it's enough to, if you appreciate the artwork enough to spend the extra money. And this in and of itself, I got public domain pictures, so they're not, I mean, most of them are fairly high res, but I didn't spend a lot of time making sure that this was an art book. But like here, here's very dark. It's hard to make out any detail about the legs on the chair he's sitting on. You lose some of the detail on his coat. Here you're able to see the highlights. You're able to see that Habsburg jaw right there. But that's the difference in the art. In the standard color, the darker colors tend to blend into more of just a darker, not really a blob, because you can see the details. but I'd say the main thing is it has a lot less contrast, maybe in the darker colors. And there's Kaiser Karl V riding away, riding into battle. So anyway, those are the three versions of my book, and is probably my magnum opus because I don't plan on putting nearly as much effort ever again into a role playing game as I did this. I do have a version coming out it's basically the last half of the book, mostly the factions and stuff for the Renaissance Deluxe system. But I didn't write my own system or anything with it. It's for use with it. Um, but that one's kind of a cheapie because I'd have most of the info. I just reformatted what I had to release it for that different game. But uh, anyway, there we are. And for a few final words. All right. Well, I appreciate everyone going through that somewhat long breakdown of my book. Pride, long windedness, all those things made that another not so short review. But if you are interested, I've got the links down there, some affiliate links. I'll get a little extra possibly, and it won't cost you any extra. But it's a way to support my work and any future products I may put out. I appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoy it if you decide to get it. And thank you very much. Happy gaming.